So what was our main idea from last week? Okay, we captured it in one succinct sentence. All right, direction, not intention, determines destination. All right, direction, not intention, determines destination. So many of us have good intentions in the things that we do, but we don't always make the right decisions that actually get us to the destination that we want. And how do we know we've gotten to the wrong destination? What do we experience? Regret. We experience regret. That's when you know you've gotten to the wrong destination. But one of the more challenging things of this series, okay, is to self-reflect. Okay, to self-reflect on the path that you are taking. We said it's easy to kind of identify the paths of others. And we identify the paths of others because we look and we're like, oh, I know exactly where that decision is going to take them. Or, ooh, they should have seen that one coming from a mile away. Or like, didn't you know that was going to happen when you take out 4 credit cards with 0% financing? You know what's going to happen, right? So it's easy to look at others, the lives of others, and say like, come on, you should know better. But the challenge is to look at ourselves and say like, okay, well, what decisions am I making? What path am I on? And a lot of times it becomes easier to self-reflect when you look at examples. All right, so we're going to look at an example that is biblical, racy, and exciting. So let's get started, all right? So anybody who thought the Bible was boring, pay attention, all right? Let's go to Proverbs, all right? So Proverbs is a book written by Solomon, and Solomon shared a story in the book of Proverbs. We don't know if this is a real story or not a real story, but Solomon is sharing a story that he is seeing from up in his palace balcony. So he's kind of looking down at the town, all right? And he's seeing something unfold. So this is the story that we're going to pick up that Solomon is sharing, all right? So Proverbs 7, and we'll look at the first few verses, 6 and 7. For at the window of my house I looked through my lattice, and I saw among the simple, I perceived among the youths, a young man devoid of understanding. All right? I think many of us can probably be like, yes, I probably fit that bill. All right? At some point in time. But Solomon is looking out, and he's seeing that there's this young guy, and he doesn't know him, but he makes a statement and says, like, he's devoid of understanding. Pretty much like, he's a bit foolish. He's simple. All right? Is there merit to what Solomon is saying? Is there legitimacy to what he's saying? And actually, yes. Sean T. Feldham is an author of a book called For Parents Only. And in her book, she references studies that show that the frontal lobe of individuals do not really develop until their mid-20s. Meaning, what happens in the frontal lobe, it's where our reasoning happens. All right? So really, like, until you are in your mid to late 20s, and unfortunately, like, some adults never develop, okay, here, like, I'm not pointing out anybody, I'm just, I didn't mean it like that, guys, all right? Right? But sometimes the frontal lobe doesn't develop quite fully, and therefore we struggle to reason through decisions. Okay? We struggle to make good decisions. And I mean, why do you think, like, when we make a bad decision, we're trying to jog the reasoning in our head? Doesn't always work. All right? As a teenager, when your parents ask you, why do you do that, and you can't come up with an example or a reason as to why you did that, blame it on the frontal lobe. Why'd you do that? My frontal lobe isn't developed well. It'll work. Let me know how that goes. All right? Don't tell my son to say that. All right? But so Solomon looks out and he sees this young boy who's walking. And he says that he's simple and that he lacks understanding. Let's see why he lacks understanding. Passing along the streets near her corner, and he took the path to her house. in the twilight, in the evening, the black and the dark of night. So what's Solomon setting up right now? Solomon's saying that this young boy, this young man, whose frontal lobe is still developing, is walking towards the night, but he's walking in a certain direction. He's walking towards her direction. Took path towards her house. And it was at night, in the dark of the night. What's this young boy looking for? Let's be honest, this guy wants to get lucky. That's what he's going for, okay? You ask him, like, young man, why are you in this part of town? Past your curfew, around this area? I mean, he probably knows why he's there, all right? He wants to experience something, all right? He thinks that what he's walking towards is a night to remember. And if you really ask him and begin to corner him and say, like, look, really, why are you here? Like, I know you're going towards her house. Like, why are you doing this? Answer you might get is, what's the big deal? What can happen in just one night? What's the big deal of one night? Let's keep on reading. And there a woman met him in the attire of a harlot and a crafty heart. She was loud and rebellious. Her feet would not stay at home. At times she was outside, at times in the open square, lurking at every corner. Solomon, standing up from his porch, was looking down, and he was seeing something unfold. He saw the whole picture before him. He knew the type of woman that she was, described her. He knew that she didn't just spontaneously end up where she did. He knew that she was there because of a certain direction that she took in life, certain decisions that she made that led her to, well, let's see, how did he put it? She was loud and rebellious. Her feet would not stay at home. That's a decision you make, to not have your feet stay at home. It's a decision that you make to go outside in the open square, to lurk on every corner. So Solomon knew the type of person that this woman was. And Solomon, from his own experience with women, knew that decisions like this carried a force. Okay, carried a force. He knew that this type of decision could derail even the wisest of people. But let's keep on going. This is kind of a cool story. So she caught him and kissed him. With an imprudent face, she said to him, I have peace offerings with me today. I have paid my vows. What'd she say? I just went and confessed and now I'm clean. All right? So I came out to meet you diligently to seek your face, and I have found you. I have spread my bed with tapestry-colored coverings of Egyptian linen. I have perfumed my bed with myrrh, aloes, and cinnamon. Come, let us take our fill of love until morning. Let us delight ourselves with love. For my husband is not at home. He has gone a long journey, has taken a bag of money with him, and will come home on the appointed day. Man, she made this irresistible. Like, if you're this guy, okay, who lacks understanding, like, could you paint a more perfect picture for what you were trying to accomplish that night? Not only were you going out, but you had somebody looking for you, okay? And not only did she look for you, but she prepared for you. She went and got the Egyptian linens out, okay, for you. She got the best spices out for you. And she was not like playing hard to get. She was very direct. She went and she kissed him and said, boom, boom, boom. Like, if you're this young man, like, it doesn't get better, but actually it does, because she said, my husband has left. He took a large sack of money, so I know he's going to be gone for a long time. And he told me his appointed day to come back is in the future. So not only are we just talking about one night, but why not several nights? That's the situation. If you're this young man looking for a special one night, it seems extremely logical to take this night of all nights. Why? Because logic of the moment just seems logical. Like, if I'm looking for this sort of night, it seems like I should probably take this opportunity. All right? I was looking for her, she was looking for me. Bedroom just happens to be prepared. Husband's away. I'll stay for maybe a couple nights. At the end of it, I'll go my way, she can go her way, she can remain married. I will go on to whatever else I want to go on. No harm, no foul. Just a decision. Just a decision. With her enticing speech, she caused him to yield. With her flattering lips, she seduced him. Solomon has one more thing to say. Actually, a couple more things to say. Immediately he went after her as an ox goes to the slaughter. Solomon spent a lot of time painting a picture of an opportunity that many would think is once-in-a-lifetime opportunity. But Solomon knew what was happening. Okay, we don't do one-time up, like once-in-a-lifetime things and end up dead. All right, Solomon knew that if this man, this young boy devoid of wisdom, goes in, that it's not a one-night decision, that he's now being slaughtered. He's the ox going to the slaughter. Now therefore listen to me, my children. Pay attention to the words of my mouth. Do not let your heart turn aside to her ways. Do not stray into her paths. I think this sums up a lot for us. If we can look at our own lives and look at the decisions that we have made, that we thought were isolated, that we thought made sense, were logical. But only until later we look back and be like, oh man, I was the ox going to the slaughter. I was the ox going to the slaughter. Why do we struggle to see that picture unfold? There's a disconnect somewhere. There's a disconnect, all right, that happens in our brain that allows us to evaluate. Solomon, looking up high, is looking and be like, I see this whole thing unfolding. Our parents look at us sometimes and are like, I see this thing unfolding. We look at our kids and be like, I see this thing unfolding. We look at our friends, you're like, I know exactly where this relationship is going. But why does it, when it comes to us, we struggle? We struggle because there's a disconnect. There's a disconnect. And the disconnect, all right, is that decisions now, with the decisions we make now, the destination comes later. With the choices that we make now, the outcomes are later. We struggle to logic through that. We can logic through some of it. We can logic through the events of the moment. But we struggle to logic and see where the events and the decisions of the moment are going to have the impact later on in life. Anybody who's looked honestly at their life is going to be able to see disconnect between the desired destination and the current decision-making patterns. We want our marriages to be strong, but we always put the kids in front of the marriage. We want to really experience an intimate relationship with God, but I can't stop during my day to pray. I really want my kids to grow up and love God and me in the church, but I can only make it once or twice out of the month. I want to have a certain GPA that's going to offer me a certain set of choices when it comes to grad schools, but I can't seem to just take my studies seriously. I want to feel connected to people at church and have meaningful friendships, but I'm too busy tending and accomplishing my list of to-dos. There's a disconnect. The choices that we make now and the outcomes we face later. But you know what? We're in the 21st century, in the country that has the most access to all the information possible to any one of us. We live in an age where data is at our fingertips. We've actually become very good at collecting data when it comes to our decisions. All right? I give you an example, like for us, we collected a lot of data before finally just pulling the trigger on some sort of college saving program. This was like a never-ending story for us. We collected data, this program, that program, tax relief, and what's going to happen later on, and what are the chances of the market. We collected all this data to try and make a decision. We sought advice. So we collect data. When you are coming up on an important decision in life, what do? You ask your parents. You try and collect as much data so that you can make the best decision that you can make. So we want all the data around us. But there's some things in life where we struggle to collect enough data. All right? There's some decisions that just aren't so clear-cut. And even in those decisions, what can we do? We can collect a fair amount of data. Maybe not all the data that we want to have under our belts in order to decide, but we can collect a fair amount of data and reviews and so on. But do we always follow the data? Do we always follow all the information that we collect? All the data doesn't matter because too frequently we think we're the exception. We can collect all the data. We ask, when you did this in your relationship, how did it go? And we can ask all these questions. But sometimes, even though we have all the data, it doesn't matter. Because I'm the exception. I'll make it work differently. All right? Think of it. Despite the data, if you have a mentor, I'm sure your mentor has given you advice. Your parents have given you advice. Your priest shouts advice to you every week. You go to a counselor, you pay for that advice. All right? You go to an advisor, you might pay for that advice. But even though your counselor, your advisor gives you all this data based on research, do you always follow it? Why? It's kind of an interesting question for a society that loves data. All right? I can't even remember the score of the Bears game last week, but I could ask Google and she could tell to me. All right? We collect data so quickly. But all the data in the world doesn't matter. Because we think we're the exception. And we live sometimes as if we are the exception, and we make the mistakes of the person who thinks they're the exception. But what's that cost when we make these mistakes? If we're honest with ourselves, what's that cost? Because as we're realizing throughout this series is that the isolated decisions that we make aren't so isolated. When we make decisions against a lot of the advice or data that we collect, what's at stake can be seasons of our life. We can lose seasons of our lives without even realizing it. Mistakes that we make in our single years will come out in our married years, and we won't be able to enjoy some of our married years. Okay? When you slack off in school, and you think it's fun to slack off in school, it hits you when all your friends are going on to whatever programs or getting married and things like that, and you realize I don't have my act together. And this girl just walked in. She's the one, but I couldn't afford her. You realize that. Not afford her just financially, but afford her like, because you can't provide like a home, you can't provide any sustainable career, you can't finance a family, okay? You can't stay committed to a family, so you're not at that stage. But man, skipping school sounded awesome on that Tuesday. All right? When we bury ourselves in our careers, our family, and our homes, well into our 20s, 30s, and 40s, and we wake up in our 50s realizing, I got no friends. And I've lost my social ability to go out and make friends. It made sense when I was trying to establish my career. But man, in my 50s, when I'm alone, that's a hard place to be. It's a hard place to be. But people said, like, don't work so much. Don't work so much. What are you talking about? It's time for me to build my career. There are concrete consequences to our decisions and directions. But they only really hurt when we realize we have lost, and because of the way life is, that we only get to enjoy seasons in our life once, we sustain immense loss, like loss that we grieve. And that's why we say life is so sacred. Because every stage of life, every season of life is so precious because we only get to live it once. But when we are careless, when we live that season of our life, we're going to pay for it in the next season. We don't realize it, but we will. Ask some of the older folks, okay, in the room. And they will tell you that, yeah, I missed out on this season. Or I missed out because I made this decision. So are we hosed? Okay? Do we have just unrecoverable losses? Is that the way life goes? I'm just going to make these mistakes? Well, I think if we challenge ourselves and think that maybe, just maybe, I don't know what's best for me. I know that's like a foreign thought to us, all right? And that we struggle to think that way. But if we could all just step out of our egos for a little bit, mine too, all right? Step out of our egos for a little bit and say, just maybe, I don't know what's best for me. Then I think we have a chance. But if we're unable to say just maybe, I don't know exactly what's best for me, well, that's fine. Live your life as the exception. But if we can say just maybe, I don't know what's best for me, and I'll lend an ear, then I have a chance. Because Solomon said, but with the humble is wisdom. All right? But let's kind of explore this idea. But with the humble is wisdom. If there ever was a man who could make the argument that I don't need to ask others' opinions on what to do, who was it? Solomon. Yes, it was Jesus, okay. All right. Sorry, Jesus. But then Solomon. All right. If there ever was a man who could make an argument to say, I don't need to ask other people what to do, okay, it was Solomon. Why? Because he's known as the wisest man there ever was. How wise? This is what it was described in Kings. And God gave Solomon wisdom and exceedingly great understanding and largeness of heart like the sand on the seashore. The Solomon's wisdom excelled the wisdom of all men in the east and all the wisdom of Egypt, for he was wiser than all men. So if anybody could make the argument saying, I know best for me, it's Solomon. Not only was he wise, but he was given wisdom from God, okay? He could come back and say, like, God, I received your wisdom. You can take care of the rest of the world. I'm good, all right? I received your wisdom. Solomon went on to write 3 books. Proverbs, Ecclesiastes, Song of Solomon. What do we call them? Books of wisdom, all right? Covered a variety of topics like science, math, business, marriage, justice, and like Like the story we read earlier, a little bit of excitement too, all right? So where did all this start? Let's kind of follow the path to Solomon's wisdom. So Solomon stepped into his reign as king after his father David at the age of 20, all right? David was a mighty man, known as the greatest king to ever govern the people of Israel, back when it was one kingdom. We don't know anything about Solomon. We know David was fantastic. We don't know anything about Solomon. Solomon had no battle experience to what we know. Solomon had no musical talent. Solomon was the son of Bathsheba, who his father David committed adultery with. All right? Solomon had no significant time in politics prior to stepping onto the throne at the age of 20. We don't know much about Solomon up until he becomes king. And Solomon knew that too. And Solomon felt the weight of his new position. Stepping into the throne at the age of 20, Solomon felt lost. And so Solomon went to go and sacrifice. And after he sacrificed, the Lord appeared to him in a dream. And we pick it up in 1 Kings. It says, "Now, O Lord my God." And in this dream, the Lord asked him, make one wish. Make one wish, and I'll grant it for you. Because I loved your father David, I'm going to grant this for you. So Solomon, this is what he said in response to that. "Now, O Lord my God, you have made your servant king instead of my father David. But I'm a little child." Blame it on the frontal lobe. Okay? "But I'm a little child. I do not know how to go out or come in. And your servant is in the midst of your people whom you have chosen, a great people, too numerous to be numbered and counted. Therefore, give to your servant an understanding heart to judge your people, that I may discern between good and evil. For who is able to judge this great people of yours?" Solomon openly admitted, "I have no idea what I'm doing. This is a big job, and I have no idea what I'm doing." Solomon knew at the age of 20 what some of us wish we knew at the age of 20. All right? Solomon was wise enough to know he wasn't wise. That's the extent of his wisdom. He knew that to rule, you need to be wise. Solomon was wise enough to look at himself and say, "I'm not wise. God, I need wisdom." Humility opens the door for wisdom. So, what was God's response? Verses 10 and 12. "The speech pleased the Lord that Solomon had asked this thing." The speech pleased the Lord that Solomon had asked this thing. And God said to him, "Because you have asked this thing, and have not asked long life for yourself, nor have asked riches for yourself, nor have asked the life of your enemies, but have asked for yourself understanding to discern justice, behold, I have done according to your word. See, I have given you a wise and understanding heart, so that there has not been anyone like you before you, nor shall any be like you after you." The Lord was so pleased with Solomon that he gave him wisdom, and then he goes on to give him so many other things, the things that he didn't ask, richness and power and standing, on a global scale. The Lord gave him all this. So Solomon could make the argument that I have all the wisdom I need. I can collect all the data that I need to make my own decisions. But Solomon knew the difference between wisdom and true wisdom. Solomon knew the difference between wisdom and true wisdom, because true wisdom is to know that wisdom alone wasn't enough. Solomon knew that wisdom alone wasn't going to be enough. All right? So, what do I mean by that? Let's look at one of the famous verses that Solomon ever wrote. Proverbs 3:5. "Trust in the Lord with all your heart, and lean not on your own understanding." We could probably all recite it blindfold. All right, blindfold. We know this verse. Trust in the Lord with all your heart. The idea of trust is the idea of somebody who is just completely helpless, all right? Somebody who has no idea how to do anything for himself. Picture yourself like completely like laying on the ground and knowing that you have to trust everybody else to do something for you, okay? Like somebody who's paralyzed, trust that somebody else is going to do everything for them because they can't do it on themselves. It's not like by choice, okay? It's the fact of the situation that a paralyzed person isn't going to like reach and grab a cup and take a drink of water. That's the idea of trust that we need to have. That life-sustaining measures comes from trusting that other people will do something for you. When Solomon is talking about trust in the Lord with all your heart, that's what he's saying. Trust God with all of your heart, and then he couples it with lean not on your own understanding. When you balance these two, trust God with all and lean not, there's no room in between. There's no gray part to life. It's trust God with all and lean not. Okay, so what's left for me? Nothing. It's kind of nice, all right? But that's really difficult, to trust God with all and lean not. Solomon was trying to say that choosing the right path comes with submission to God's will. If we want to choose the path that God has laid for us, then we have to choose to submit to His will. There's no way I can submit to His will when I don't trust God with all my heart and I lean on my own understanding. When I don't trust and lean on, how am I submitting to God's will? But when I choose to trust in and lean not, I've now taken all of my will and submitted it to God. Let's keep moving. In all your ways, acknowledge Him. Acknowledge has taken on a different meaning in our society. When we say acknowledge, when you open a book and it's acknowledgement, okay, what's the author doing? Saying, so-and-so helped me with this book. Okay, it was a collaborative effort and I really appreciate it. If a special guest were to be here, I would acknowledge him and say, so-and-so is joining us today. When you go to a banquet hall, they like to acknowledge, like, we acknowledge so-and-so for being such a strong contributor to our organization. We acknowledge people, right? Is that what Solomon is talking about now? Acknowledge God. No. Solomon's idea and understanding of acknowledge is recognizing that He is God and responding accordingly. To acknowledge God in all your ways, acknowledge Him is pretty much to say in everything that I do, He is God, and I will respond accordingly to the advice that He gives me. But you know what? We don't like that. What we like is the sometimes, always, never. Remember those tests in school where they ask you, like, list the questions and say, sometimes, always, never. Like, this sometimes happens, or this never happens, or, you know, this always happens. I hated those tests. I absolutely hated those tests because there's always that one little exception to the always, all right, question. But anyway, I think we live our spiritual lives with the always, sometimes, never, all right? Sometimes I acknowledge God when I'm at work. I never acknowledge God with my finances, but I always acknowledge God when I start my quiet time by prayer. Sometimes, always, never. We just choose and fit God however we want. We acknowledge Him when it's convenient to us. But what Solomon is saying here is that when we acknowledge God, we acknowledge that He is God, and we respond as if He is God. Not sometimes. Not never, but always. Not always just in my quiet time, but always at work, and always in my finances, always in my marriages, and always in my relationship, and always in the little decisions of my life. It's why we constantly challenge ourselves to stop looking at life as being sacred and secular. All of life is sacred. Why? Because we acknowledge God. And God doesn't say, well, I created you, but I'm not going to worry about this. He said, I created you, and I worry about all of you, and I care for all of you. All of you matters to me. In all your ways acknowledge him, and he shall direct your paths. Solomon knew that common sense, information, data, advice from others wasn't enough. The wisest man is telling us from his seat, saying, everything that you can collect, all the data, all the information, all the advice from your counselors, it doesn't matter. It's not enough. It's good to have, but it's not enough. Because at the end, if we are to follow God's path for us, God's path comes in submission to his will. But we do a good job of leaning on our own understanding. Because ask yourself, like, in those situations in life where you have gone and you've asked advice from this person and this person and this person and this person, all right? And you've researched it online and you've gathered as much information. What happens? Inside we go and we process and we think and we hear the advice from other people, but then we look inside and be like, but I'm not like that and stuff like that. So we begin to tailor all the advice that we get in order to come to a decision that we think is appropriate for me and for my family and for whatever else. What have we done? I've leaned on my own understanding of myself. But Solomon challenges us to submit and acknowledge God in all things, which is not easy. And we will go through that process. I'm not saying that that process is now like thrown away. But I think what we're being challenged is to say, when I gather all that information, how much time do I spend gathering the final and most important piece in prayer, which is for God to tell me what direction to use, what direction to go, what decision to make. We collect all this information. We spend a lot of time doing it. But how much of that time do we collect information from God to make sure like we're clear on what he wants? Because a lot of times what he wants goes contrary to what like we see as logical. We're burning with anger towards somebody. We share our story with somebody. They're like, yeah, you don't forgive them. They really did something wrong. Take that same thing to God. What do you think he will say? Trust God in all and lean not on our own understanding. If we really want to find our path, and we want it to be a path that God has laid for us, choosing the right path comes in submission to God's will. Any questions? All right, stand up and pray. Dear Father, in some ways, and then thank you, Lord, for your blessings. Thank you for this day. And we ask, Lord, that you would continue to guide us along this series, that we would look at ourselves. That I would bring under the microscope of my life all the decisions and ask myself, truly, Lord, am I trusting you with my heart? Or am I leaning on my own understanding? It's a lot more comfortable to lean on our own understanding. When we lean on our own understanding, like we're able to actually deal with the consequences because we feel like, well, I made that decision. So I'll deal with the consequences, Lord. But you don't desire that we deal with consequences. You desire that we have life and that we have it abundantly. But Lord, that path comes when we decide to submit our will to you. And it's not easy, and it's not clear-cut. And there are many voices that speak to us in this world. But Lord, can we make your voice the loudest? Can we give your voice the most time to speak? I think it's one of the greatest challenges for all of us. Lord, be with us as we join together in our community groups. I pray that this discussion would be uplifting, that it would be challenging, and that it would challenge us all to self-reflect on ourselves. Through the intercession of our saints, we please you from the beginning. Hear us as we say, Our Father, who art in heaven, hallowed be thy name. Thy kingdom come, thy will be done, on earth as it is in heaven. Give us this day our daily bread, and forgive us our trespasses, as we forgive those who trespass against us. And lead us not into temptation, but deliver us from evil. In Christ Jesus our Lord, and his kingdom. Now, the love of God the Father, the grace of his only begotten Son, and the Lord God and Savior Jesus Christ, and the gift of the Holy Spirit, be with you all. Peace, the Lord be with you.